What's up YouTube, it's Samara, and if you are new to the channel, welcome to the channel where you get Samara that world, get it, some more of that world. And as always you guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into the video. So today we are going to talk about the number one question I get, which is how much did you save to travel the world for a year? But I think the better question is how much are you going to need to save to travel the world for a year? Because what I saved may not actually apply to you because everyone is different and what they need in terms of their lifestyle and what they want to accomplish out of their travels is going to be different. So if you are someone who wants to do something similar to me, which is to go travel the world for a year, I'll give you guys what you guys need to kind of think about in terms of creating that budget. And if you guys don't know me, or like I said, you're new to this channel, I quit my job to travel the world for a year. And although it was supposed to be a year, it ended up being about 9.5 months because I had some family emergencies, coronavirus hit, there was a bunch of reasons. And yeah, it ended up being about 9.5 months, but my goal was to travel for a year, so I did budget for that. So I just want to kind of discuss the things that you need to consider before making your budget and how that compares to my budget, and then you can go from there. So the top 3 things that you guys need to consider is what kind of traveler are you? Are you someone who likes living a life of luxury and traveling luxuriously? Or are you someone who's okay with doing more of a backpacking thing where you stay in hostels the entire time? The other thing you need to consider is what countries you want to spend your time in, because depending on where you spend most of your time, your budget will differ quite drastically, and also how quickly you want to move. So how many countries you want to see in the year. So in terms of the luxury aspect of things, I wasn't living very luxuriously, so my budget was more for a backpacker type of situation. I was staying in mainly hostels, and I wasn't staying in hotels or nice Airbnbs or even having my own private room. I had my own private room a few times during my travels, but it was pretty rare. I also split Airbnbs a couple times with people, so once again, it was not that often that I did that. I was mainly staying in hostels. And then another thing that I realized while I was traveling that I hadn't even thought about before was if you're going to want a gym membership, or not even a gym membership, but being able to go to the gym. Because while I was in Southeast Asia, I realized that there were travelers who were going to gyms and they were buying day passes. So then I started to do that towards the end, but it wasn't even something that I had even thought about like putting into my budget. And towards the end, I was able to spend some more money than I had allocated for my budget because, like I said, that year that I was supposed to be traveling turned into 9.5 months. So I basically had 2.5 months of extra money that I wasn't going to spend towards travel. So I was like, I'm just gonna use it to go to the gym. But if you're trying to travel for a year and you like going to the gym, you have to consider that as another thing you need to add to your budget that you might want to save for. Obviously, depending on where you are, some gyms are going to be very expensive. I highly doubt that in Europe you're going to be able to find a gym that's going to let you go to the gym for $5 a day. So you might not want to go to the gym while you're in those expensive countries. You might just want to do more active stuff like walking around or going on hikes. But yeah, that's something that you should consider, is just kind of how luxuriously do you want to live. And then in terms of how quickly you want to move, technically you could see 26 countries in a year if you were to spend 2 weeks in each country. But to be honest, 2 weeks in a country isn't necessarily always enough time, especially if you really want to get a feel for a country. For example, when I was in Thailand, I actually spent 6 weeks there and I still didn't feel like I saw everything I wanted to see. And in the beginning, when you first start traveling long term, you are probably going to be moving quicker because you just are excited and you're like, I want to see as much as I can. But as more time passes, you're gonna probably start to get worn down by that. This is more of a lifestyle. It's not the same thing as just short-term traveling. So at some point you might have days where you just want to chill out in the hostel and do nothing. So that's kind of what happened to me while I was in Thailand. I found this city called Pai that I really loved, and so I ended up spending 3 weeks there, literally 3 weeks just hanging out in one city. So yeah, you guys might want to do that. So you kind of have to consider how quickly you want to move. Realistically, I think a good amount of countries to see in a year is about 12 to 16 countries. That's probably what's realistic without having to rush through a bunch of countries. But let's say hypothetically that you do want to do that and you want to be doing the country every 2 weeks and see 26 countries in a year. Well, it's going to be more expensive for you because I didn't do that. I moved a lot slower. So think about it. If you're moving a lot faster, you're gonna have to spend more money on things like buses, trains, and flights. And then in terms of where you want to spend most of your travels, that's another thing you have to consider, because there are certain countries where things are a lot more expensive. So I'm talking about parts of Europe. Not necessarily all of Europe, because I actually did spend a good amount of time in in Europe, but it was mainly Eastern Europe. There are also countries like Japan and Israel that are very expensive. So if you were going to try to live on my budget, that probably wouldn't be possible for the amount of time that I actually spent in these countries, because honestly, in Europe, like I said, I did spend most of my time in Eastern Europe, but I also had friends in Europe that let me stay with them for a few nights, and that saved me money because I didn't have to pay for accommodation for those nights. And then when I was in Israel, I spent 5 weeks in Israel, but Israel is a very expensive country, and the only reason I spent 5 weeks there is because at that time I was seeing someone, and when we would see each other, he would pay for a lot of my stuff, like my meals, like literally he would pay for like my lunch and dinner, or sometimes occasionally cook for me, or he would pay for my bus tickets when we would like go places. So yeah, if it weren't for him, I definitely wouldn't have stayed in Israel as long as I did. So those are just things you guys need to consider, is that there are certain countries that are going to be way more expensive, and if you stay in them for a long time, it's going to be hard to stay within the budget that I had. So you might want to save more money for those kinds of countries. Now you guys are probably wondering, well, Samara, what is it? What is the budget? How much did you save per day? And that answer is $50 a day. I saved up for $50 a day, but once again, what you need is going to vary, because if you are someone who wants to stay in hotels and Airbnbs and private rooms, you're going to need more money, because I mainly stayed in hostels. Like I said, I was moving not super quickly. There were certain times that I really was going very slow, and also I wasn't staying in expensive countries. I tried to avoid that. The only couple of times I stayed in expensive countries, like I said, was Israel, but I had someone there who was basically helping me financially. Sweden, I had a friend who let me stay with her, so that helped with that. And then Japan, I only stayed there for 2 weeks, but with Japan, it was like racking up. I mean, you can easily spend $50 to $100 a day in Japan. Now, I also want to say that just because my budget was $50 a day doesn't mean that that's what I was spending in every country. My goal was to be able to save money in cheaper countries so that when I spent more money in expensive countries, that it would kind of even out. So if I was spending $70 a day in Europe, but $30 a day in Southeast Asia, that overall the average would be $50 a day. Now, if you guys are the kind of people that really don't need a lot of luxury and you don't want to spend a ton of time in these more expensive countries, you could live in certain countries in Southeast Asia for very cheap. There were times when I was in Bali that I only spent $10 a day because I wasn't really doing much. I was just chilling at the hostel, maybe I would walk around the town, and all I was really paying for was accommodation and food. So, you know, I was able to live there for extremely cheap. If you're gonna spend most of your time in Southeast Asia, you might need an even smaller budget than what I had, which, like I said, was at $50 a day. If you spent your entire year in Southeast Asia, you could probably live there pretty comfortably on $20 to $30 a day. And if you had $50 a day, you'd basically be living like a queen or a king. So yeah, just depending on where you guys want to go, how luxuriously you want to live, and how quickly you want to move, that will determine how much you're going to spend for the year. But $50 is a good baseline to start with, just to get an idea of how much it could cost you to travel for a year, spending some time in expensive countries but without doing a ton of activities. I did not do a ton of activities in Europe. Most of my time was spent just like walking around and exploring the city, and then spending a good amount of time in these more cheap countries like in Southeast Asia. And I did actually get to do some really nice activities like whitewater rafting, zip lining. I did a whole motorbike tour in Vietnam. So with $50 a day, you can spend your money on nice activities, but you're just not gonna be able to do it all the time. When I was in Europe, I wasn't really spending money on museums because that would have taken a lot out of my budget. So I would try to find cheap ones or free museums and just do a lot of walking and exploring the city. So yeah, and just so you guys know, I actually have on my blog more information about this so you guys can get a better idea of how you need to budget, because I'm giving you guys kind of a breakdown of what you need to consider, but there's a couple of other things that you should consider that I'm not going to include in this video because I really wanted to just make this more about living expenses. But there are other expenses you might want to consider outside of your living expenses that you might want to save for. And on my blog, I also have a budget, so you guys can go look and see how much money I allocated per category so that you guys can decide how you want to allocate your money based on that budget. And I will go ahead and leave those two links in the description so you guys can go check those articles out. And one more thing I want to say before I end this video is that it doesn't really matter how much it costs you to travel the world for a year, because at the end of the day, if you're someone who wants to live a little bit more luxuriously, or you've been traveling for, I don't know, 2-3 months, and you're deciding that the backpacking thing isn't really working for you and you want to live a little bit more luxuriously, it's not like you can't do that. It's just that the amount of time you're going to be able to travel is obviously going to be less, which maybe is something that's better for you. So instead of traveling for a year and spending $50 a day, you could travel for 6 months and have a budget of $100 a day. You're going to be able to live a lot more comfortably on that kind of budget. It's just that you're going to not be able to travel as much. But once again, like I said, you guys, traveling doesn't have to be expensive. You can literally live in Southeast Asia for very cheap. I mean, really, $30 a day, you could live there comfortably. If you want to live there more luxuriously, $50 a day. And also, I want to say that just because I'm telling you how much it costs you to live on, you should also have money saved for when you come back to your country. Because for me, I did save money to, obviously travel for a year, but I also had an amount of money that I also saved for when I were to come back in case I couldn't find a job right away. I didn't want to come back and be completely broke. I wanted to be able to have money to pad myself if I needed rent for a few months while I was looking for a job. So I would highly recommend that, keeping that in mind, that you should not go and travel and spend all of your money on your travels. Like, you really should try to have money saved at the end of your travels. So if you're starting to run out of money and you're gonna need extra money for when you come back home, I would just cut your travel short and go home and find a way to make extra money. But I'm also going to say that my perception on things has really changed since I left, because when I first left, thought that I was going to go travel and that I was going to come back and I was going to go work for a company again. I just thought, I'll just get it out of my system and then I'll go back to work for a company. But that didn't really happen. I came back and I got obsessed with traveling. It didn't get rid of the travel bug. If anything, it made it worse. So now I'm trying to figure out how to be able to keep traveling and be able to work from anywhere that I want. So that happened to a lot of people that I met on my travels. They either ended up finding ways to work in other countries, which there are other countries that will hire you to work there. And there was a couple of times on my travels that I was offered jobs. So you could technically work in other countries. And then there's also other people who try to find ways to make money online so that they can work from anywhere in the world. And then another thing that people do is sometimes they'll fall in love with some passion of theirs and then stay up somewhere teaching that. So for instance, some people will go get their scuba diving certification in Thailand, and then they'll end up staying in Koh Tao teaching people how to scuba dive. So yeah, I mean, really, you don't know where your life is gonna take you. I don't feel like you need to rush the whole experience. I kind of felt rushed because I felt like, like I said, I was gonna go back to corporate America or go back to working for a company where I'd only be able to have 2 to 3 weeks off a year. And so I was like, this is the only time I'm gonna be able to travel. I might as well get it in, get in as much as I can before I have to go back to that. And obviously I'd only be able to travel 2 weeks out of the year. So yeah, but the reality is that's not really how it played out. Now I'm actually trying to become location independent. So you never know where life's gonna take you. You might do that too. You might also just find odd jobs here and there and then keep traveling. All I'm saying is that you could travel less time. It doesn't have to be a year. And also, like I said, make sure you have some money saved for when you get back if you do end up going back to your country, because I think that's just like the smart thing to do, and it's the safest thing to do in terms of your finances. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys. Hopefully that helped. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. And as always, you guys, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.